All right. So, real quick announcements. Philly.net, of course, we meet once a month. Our next meeting is the third week of September, and that's going to be on No-Op Commerce and Mike Molesky on something I forget. And we also have our monthly hands-on lab series, the Wednesday right after Labor Day. We're going to have 4 months where we're going to actually go into deep detail on GitHub and all of its associated tools. So that'll be September through December. The other thing for Philly.net to be aware of, November 16th and 17th is our next code camp, and you'll be seeing a lot of information about that right after Labor Day. I'm going to start pestering people to speak, to sponsor, all those things that make a code camp happen. Other than that, any news in Philly Azure, Mr. Farrow?
Yeah, I just saw announced there is an Azure AI event here in September, and our next monthly meetup will be posted to the site probably tonight or tomorrow. We already have that locked in.
Okay, very good. In that case, we're going to get started with our first talk about Microsoft's full AI ecosystem in Azure, and this is Stephan Bisser from Austria, and I'm going to
frame, and the developments or the things you and we all will develop will be much more powerful than back 20 or 50 years ago. What does Microsoft offer in the AI ecosystem? It's not only about bots and not only about cognitive services. There are a lot more things to consider. First of all, you have to think about all the deep learning frameworks, which are not only built by Microsoft, also built by Google and other big vendors. Of course, Microsoft has its cognitive toolkit, which you can utilize to develop your own AI models. You can also use TensorFlow or Caffe2 or whatever other deep learning framework you want to use. You can also use them within Azure, on-prem, in a hybrid scenario, whatever you like. Going one step upper, you have to think about infrastructure, about AI infrastructure, thinking about Cosmos DB, SQL databases, the Azure Data Lake stores, and all those kind of things can be looked at AI on data. So it's all about getting data and getting the means out of data, or AI compute, where you have your AKS services, you have your batch AI services where you can run massive workloads and processes with AI toolkits out there on Azure. And going one step upper again, the AI services are based on the AI infrastructure and on the deep learning frameworks you see on this slide. You have, of course, your Azure Bot Service or the Microsoft Bot Framework. You have the cognitive services, and of course you have machine learning services which you can utilize and train to get your own ML models out there. And of course you have to have some tools in order to build that. You can choose whatever you like. You can use VS Code tools for AI in order to build bots, for example, in order to build your deep learning frameworks. You have the ML Studio in Azure in order to develop, train, and deploy your machine learning models out there. And you basically can use whatever you want to use and whatever fits your needs in order to develop on the Microsoft AI platform. But now let's talk about bots and cognitive services in detail. First of all, going one step back, having a look at the evolution of computers and IT. Some of you may remember the 80s, where you had your big desktop PCs, which were not mobile. You had them on your desk or sitting under your desk. You had your I don't know what OS installed on it. Basically, if you had one, you were cool and you could do awesome things with it back then. But compared to nowadays, you can't do anything with such a thing right now. So this had to be a bit revolutionized. So in the 90s, you had the internet, and it was all about search, and users, they could visit websites and they could do stuff on websites. It was a bit better than just having your desktop PC and having your MS-DOS console on your desktop PC. So it was a bit more interactive, but not too interactive. It got better with the 2000s, where everything was mobile, everything was social. You had your social apps like Facebook, like Twitter, etc. Users could download apps from the App Store, and they could connect with other people via those apps. It was all about being mobile and being social, being online. What does the future hold actually? From my perspective, and I guess this is also the perspective which Microsoft has currently, it will be about conversations. So it's about having a natural conversation between a human and an application or a service. Um, it's about conversational canvas. And of course, it's about bots and it's about digital agents. Um, so you don't have to get your smartphone and log on to a social platform in order to get a status update for something, but simply asking your bot, hey, what's the current status of this and that? And will be, if deployed and developed correctly, will be much more easier for a human or for a user to get information compared to navigating to a website, searching for a specific topic, searching for the right entry and getting the information instead of just asking the user, hey, what's the status? So will this is kind of what the future will hold in that area, and that's why we'll be talking bots and cognitive services right now. So what is a bot? A bot is actually nothing more than a computer program which is designed to have a conversation with a human being. And of course, this conversation may happen over the internet in the most cases, and it's about utilizing not only text, but it's about utilizing voice as well and images, because a good bot does not only talk text, it talks also voice, and it understands images. So if a user sends an image, a bot should interpret that image upon given the use case. But you won't be building bots with text only, but you have to design your bot in order to have the ability to get different conversational structures in there. So as I said, it's an app that performs tasks in an automated way. The next point is very important. It solves the user's needs in the quickest and easiest way compared to any other option. So as I mentioned before, it's much easier to ask a bot about the current status of something rather than to navigate to a website, log in there, search for something, get the right entry. So basically it should make life easier, but it has to be designed in that way. And it's not about how much AI a bot has. It's not about how much natural language it offers. As I said, a good bot can also be talking pictures. So getting input via pictures and interpreting them is also a good bot use case. And it's not whether it uses voice or not. Of course, with Cortana, Alexa, and all other voice-enabled services, this is like the Champions League for a bot developer to make it voice-enabled, but it's also the hardest or toughest task to do. So basically, the bot, nothing more than an app. So you can imagine your bot as a REST endpoint, which you can talk to, and it's built on your platform services. So you can host your bot when you talk about the Microsoft bot framework. You can host your bot in Azure, of course. You can also host your bot on-prem with the BotBuilder SDKs, which you can utilize, and you have your intelligent tools in order to make your bot smart, and those intelligent tools are the cognitive services you can use. We'll talk about them later on. And yeah, basically spoken, a bot is nothing more than a REST endpoint, which is then talking to other services like cognitive services in order to fulfill the tasks the user wants to have done. And talking about the Microsoft Bot Framework, you can imagine the Microsoft Bot Framework consisting of 2 or 3 main areas. First one is the channel area. So this is where your users can talk to your bot or can interact with your bot. You have the Microsoft Common channels like Skype, like Teams, like Cortana, but you also have your third-party vendors like Facebook Messenger, like Twilio, like GroupMe, Slack, whatever. You can also have your bot hosted in a web chat, and you can, if you want to, integrate your own channel via third-party SDKs. The good thing about that is you only have to develop your bot once, and you can deploy your bot if it's hosted on Azure simplified by one click to the various channels. So you don't have to develop your bot more times. Of course, there's some channel specific channel specific features you can only use for let's say Teams, because Teams does render some card actions, especially, but Facebook does not. So you have to think about the way you want to deploy your bot first before you start implementing it. But basically spoken, it's a develop once, deploy anywhere logic back you can utilize there. But then you have, if you want to make your bot smart, you have to use some cognitive services for either natural language understanding, for text understanding, for knowledge management, for speech, search, for image recognition and other image services. Those are the services which make your bot actually smart. So if you start developing your bot, or if you're going to the Azure portal, hit create new Azure bot service and start with that, your bot is dumb as hell. So you have to use your cognitive services in order to make your bot actually smart, and in order to make your bot understand the human input you give them. And down there you have your platform where your bot is hosted. Of course, Azure is one mainly used platform, but you can also deploy your bot anywhere else. Because as I said, it's nothing more than a web app with a REST endpoint. You deploy. You can by now with the BotBuilder 3.0 SDK, you can develop your bot using either .NET or Node.js. With the release of the BotBuilder SDK 4.0, you can also use Python or Java as a framework in order to develop your bot. So they're making it rather open, instead of just having your bots being developed in only in C#, because every one of you knows it's not only C# out there, and they want to attract more and more developers in order to make better bots with their tool set. So what's the deal within the Azure bot service or the Microsoft Bot Framework when you think about modeling your conversation actually? So the simplest and easiest way is FAQs, which follow the principle of command and control. And you can use the Q&A maker cognitive services, for example, in order to implement such a use case where you just have simple pattern, text pattern matching. If the given input sentence matches some phrases in a FAQ list or knowledge base, the bot or the cognitive services API responds with the correct answer, and the bot just represents that answer to the user. This is rather simple to implement and doesn't have some higher coding effort method. Going one step further, if you think about forms in your, let's say, intranet or whatever web app you think about, you want to capture data by the user. You want to have multiple inputs by the user gathered together in order to submit a form, for example. Then you can use a tool called FormFlow, which basically lets you create your forms, and the logic or FormFlow handles like some really cool methods for you. For example, it's not about uh, the numbering of the questions or of the input questions which have to be answered by the users, because they can answer them as they want, and if all questions are answered, then the form is submitted to the service, and you can do whatever you want to with the answers then. And it's really nice tool set in order to implement forms within a bot use case. It's like a more natural way of capturing data by users rather than having the 10th form in your intranet for I don't know what. It's a more natural way of interacting with your users. Thinking about not only one simple use case or one specific use case for your bot, but thinking about more than one use cases for one bot, you have to think about dialogues and your dialogue design in order to really structure your conversation and give the user a chance to talk to your bot as the user would talk to another human being, and really start designing dialogues. Dialogues for, let's say, greetings for use case 1, for use case 2, for within the use case 1, for sub use cases, and really structure your conversation, and as well structure your code and your logic in the back end in order to have like a decoupled implementation there. And if you want to go one step further again, you can all do that bespoke, so you can roll your own state management. You can really customize everything from scratch. So you can basically implement everything on yourself and get it implemented the way you like it. And talking about conversational mechanisms, as I said, it's not only about text. Of course, users will talk to your bot mainly in text if you don't do a voice-enabled bot. They can also have inputs like, as I said, images, and you can also respond to certain questions or certain input with media attachments like images, like cards, like links, videos. You can also respond to your users with files. The bot framework team recently announced that bots can now understand documents, so you can exchange documents with your bot, which is a really cool thing, because you can imagine you can send a large I don't know what, for example, a paper to your bot and say, hey, bot, please analyze that paper and write me a short paragraph or summary of that paper. And by utilizing the text analytics API, which is one of the cognitive services in the backend, you can just parse your paper within your bot and give it to the text analytics API with your comment in order to do a summary, and the bot then can respond to your user with the summary within the chat. So it's a really cool thing. You if you're designing your conversations, you also have to take care that you don't really have your users only inputting something via text, offer them buttons, offer them list items which are numbered in order to make the conversation faster as well. And this is also one thing from my perspective, which lets you guide the users through the conversation if you offer them buttons. So there are like predefined steps or ways of handling the conversation then, and you mainly know what the user will respond if you ask a certain question, if you offer them buttons or numbered list items, and you know the way to go within the conversation or within the dialogue. And one thing you also have to think about are rich cards and rich attachments. You have like hero cards, you have thumbnail cards, you have sign-in cards, you have adaptive cards, which is another approach of having cards only being developed once and which are natively rendered within the given channels. This is a really cool thing, a really cool project, but it's currently not released in every channel. So if you want to utilize adaptive cards, just navigate to adaptivecards.io, check out the samples and check out the current channels which are supported. And I guess they'll release by the end of the year adaptive cards for all channels which are part of the Microsoft Bot framework. And it's a really cool thing because you basically have your JSON description of your card with all those images, with all those links, text, and so on. And this JSON description is then natively rendered within Facebook, natively rendered within Teams, natively rendered within the web chat and Cortana and anything else. And this is a really cool way to have your bot being multi-channel, but only being developed once. You also have some things like channel data, which you can use in order to pass some specific data to a card within a given channel. So, for example, if you know you're building a bot for the Facebook Messenger and for Teams, and you know within the Facebook Messenger there's some certain button control you want to use. If your card is being displayed, then you can make use of the channel data property in order to give your card some specific fields. Whenever Facebook renders the card, takes those channel data and executes the card or renders the card in that way in order to get more out of the card rather than having it like the least minimum principle you get when you utilize it natively. And of course, as I said, it's like the upper class of bot design is when you implement speech. But there you have to be really careful and develop and test it extensively, because I guess every one of you will know you have different accents. I'm from Austria. We're in Austria. We have like, I don't know, 40 different accents within our country, and we're only 8 million people. So you have to think about your the users who will use the bot. What language will they be talking? Because every other language than English will not be suitable right now, because as you may know, they'll put as much effort into development of English as a language for all the cognitive services and leave the other ones a bit behind. So if you're designing a bot, a speech-enabled bot, make sure it's English based, and if you're using the cognitive services provided by Microsoft, you can also use some features like having your own accents being taught to the system or to the model. So you can basically have your phrases uploaded to your speech model, which are then used and understood by the service. So you have to basically do a heavy training on that before deploying it. And if you're developing a bot, it's not only about developing it once, deploying it, and then that's it. It's about continuous improvement. So please use the tools provided by Microsoft, like Application Insights and other services, in order to make your bot better and better. The same is true for the cognitive services. So, for example, if you're using LUIS, which is the language understanding service provided by Microsoft, make sure you train that in a given cycle in order to make your language model better and make your bot understand more phrases during the time frame the bot is already in use. If you're building bots which are not actively trained, no one will use the bots after a certain period of time if it stays on a specific level and don't get any smarter then. Talking about bots, as I said, a bot is not intelligent without any of the cognitive services in use. And there are lots of cognitive services out there you can use. For example, for having knowledge management, you can use the Q&A Maker API, which is a very simple API which offers you with a knowledge base service. So you basically have your question and answer pairs in a knowledge base stored, and you can query them via REST calls. So if you have a question provided, or if the user asks the bot a question, you can forward that question to the Q&A Maker API, and if the question's text pattern is recognized in any of the questions stored in the knowledge base, the answer is forwarded to the bot. The bot can then represent the user with the answer. But this is like very simple text pattern matching. It's not about understanding the question. It's just about if the source and destination question are basically the same or very similar, there's a higher accuracy that these questions will be met, and those answers will be then forwarded to the bot. If you want to make use of really language understanding and have your bot understand the human language, you can use LUIS, which was renamed Language Understanding. Before it was called Language Understanding Intelligence Service. And this is really a service you can use in order to build your own language models. So you can define your intents and define your entities within your given intents, and you can then have your bot act on different intents with different actions. On the demo, which I'll show you later on, I'll also show you the combination of language understanding and translation or translator text, which is also a very common use case in order to make your bot multilingual. So if you have a Q&A Maker knowledge base, which is which provides you with question and answer pairs in English, and you have your users talking to your bot in English and in German, for example. You can use translated text in order to translate the incoming inputs by the users for various, I guess they have like almost 70 supported languages right now. You can take the input, translate it into your destination language, and query the Q&A Maker API knowledge base in English, get the result in English, translate it back to the user's language, and then forward it to the user. And the user, it's for the user, it's transparent, so the user thinks the bot understands his language, but it only translates the language before and afterwards. You can also utilize some other cognitive services for search. They have various Bing cognitive services, Bing-powered cognitive services out there, like visual search, like image search, like auto suggest, which you can use if you want to build your bot, which is speech enabled. You can make use of speech to text, text to speech, speech translation, speaker recognition services, but they are all in preview currently. And if you want to have your bot understanding images, then you can use like computer vision for detecting specific like faces within images or any other objects, or you can use custom vision in order to build your own custom vision models. But let's talk about the cognitive services which are mainly used for bots in the fields of language and knowledge. This is like for language understanding, I already told you you can use LUIS, and LUIS basically it takes a given input sentence like has the food truck arrived, and the language understanding service then just checks if certain objects or certain entities are present within a given sentence. And if they're present in a given sentence, LUIS knows, okay, that's the intent, check arrival state, for example. So it basically takes the input sentence, checks for entities, compares to the past utterances for the given intents, and then gives you back a result with a probability ranging from 0 to 99.99999% that a given intent is met. Sorry, have to. Yes, I'll do so. For the language understanding service, creating your LUIS app is pretty simple. You have to log into LUIS.ai, of course, then create your LUIS app, then define and create your intents and entities. For example, your intent could be book hotel, and the entity could be location. Then you have to add your sample utterances, and you're good to go with 5 utterances for the beginning. So you basically add 5 example sentences, like book a hotel in Seattle. And if you've inserted 5 utterances, you can train your app, and then you're good to go. To test it, you can refine it. If you think it's good as it is, you can publish it and deploy it. But as I said, just don't make the mistake to publish it once and never touch it again. It's about refining it and having it continuously improved in order to make it better and better, and in order to make your users make use of your bot. Another service you can use is the text analytics API, which, as I said, lets you do a key phrase extraction, which lets you do sentiment analysis, and which lets you detect the language. You can, I've done it in the past in order to detect negative tweets via this API, where I used Azure Logic Apps in order to feed the analytics API with new tweets followed by a given hashtag. And then you can take the tweet text, do a sentiment analysis on that, and if it's lower than a given range, you can just make a tweet answer or whatever you want to, or set an action that the negative tweet has been posted. Just one sample example how to use it. Going one step further, as I said, Q&A Maker lets you simply create knowledge bases, and the setup is, compared to Luis, is a bit it's like very similar. You have to set up your Q&A Maker service from the Azure portal. You have to create your knowledge base from QAMaker.ai. You can then either populate the knowledge base by hand by inserting questions and answer pairs by hand. You can also populate your knowledge base from an online resource. If you have a FAQ stored somewhere on your website, which is publicly available, you can also use that. I'll show you in a bit how to use a SharePoint-based FAQ list for feeding your knowledge base. Then you have to train it, you have to test it, you have to refine it, of course, and if you think you're good to go, you can publish it and deploy it, and then you can make your bot using it. So in order to not be overtime, I'll jump over that. I'll also jump over the vision stuff right now. As I said, computer vision, you can analyze images, detect faces, you can detect the age of a given person within a image, but especially if you have an image of a woman up there which needs to be analyzed, be prepared. Not that good in guessing ages right now. You can also extract text. So if you have a handwritten sheet, you can also extract the text from that sheet. But now let's come to the modern workplace stuff within AI. As I said, it's about digital assistance. It's about empowering your employees in order to achieve more and let daily routines be done by assistants, not by humans. And the use cases for that are, of course, Q&A bots or FAQ assistants, because this is the easiest use case to implement. You can also use bots with the Microsoft Graph for people search, for example, for stuff like accessing Exchange Online. Ask your bot, hey, what are the latest emails I got? Accessing SharePoint Online for creating new site collections, for example. They have a collaboration bot for teams or within teams. There are like a couple of bots you can already get from the Teams App Store, which you can use within the app. In the Dynamics field, you can use your bots in order to make digital assistance for an agent during phone calls in order to get the agent some supportive tasks by the bot. You can develop and deploy a support bot for your end users, search bot, etc., etc. And all within the given channels you got out there in the Microsoft 365 ecosystem. I'll jump over that. You can basically get that information from the Azure Bot Service landing page. They have a couple of use cases listed there, which you can browse through. But you'll get my slides anyway, so you can browse through them later on as well. Coming to the demo, what I will show you right now, what I've built or what we've built at our company is a simple Q&A bot, which does an auto update based on a SharePoint list. So we have a SharePoint list which represents our FAQ, our internal FAQ, and we had the challenge that something changed on the SharePoint list, but the Q&A maker had no clue about that something has changed in the FAQ. So we implemented an Azure function which gets triggered by a SharePoint webhook on item change. Whenever something changed on the SharePoint list, the Azure function gets triggered. It takes the list, compares the list to the list how it was before, checks the changes, and then stores the changes to an Azure storage queue. And this triggers another Azure function which updates the Q&A maker knowledge base with the changed items. So if there were adds, if there were deletes, or if there were changes, the Q&A maker database or knowledge base will be updated within a couple of seconds. So I'll need to find my browser right now. So please apologize for the German internet, but we're mainly focusing on German customers. But this is like an intranet page for sales. So this is based on SharePoint Online. We have our intranet there, and we have our FAQ list there, which is populated with questions and answers. And if you look at the FAQ list, this is like just a template for displaying the FAQ, but it's just a normal SharePoint list where you have title, which is basically the question. You have your answer field, and you also have a category field. And for example, I've added two sample questions currently within the SharePoint list. And on the other side, we have our bot, which is called Sally Solvion, which is deployed in Teams. She's also deployed within SharePoint Online via web chat here. And what you can do right now is you can first of all talk to the bot, saying hi. And I hope the demo gods are with me right now. She'll respond with hi as well. I guess not. Yeah. That's no. Okay. So I can ask her for help, for example, and she'll give me some advice what I can ask her about. And if you look a bit closer, I am now talking to her in English. It says, "What is a bot?" In the FAQ list, there's a question, "Was ist ein Bot?" This is German for "What is a bot?" So what she basically does is, her main language is German, but I can talk to her in English, I can talk to her in German, I can talk to her in Spanish, and I can talk to her in all those almost 70 supported language which are supported by Bing, by a text translator. She'll take the input, translate it to her native language, which is apparently German, take it to the backend, do the backend stuff, and before she responds to me, she'll basically translates the response back to my native language, which I'm talking to her. So you can basically very easily have her being multilingual. So if I right now add another question here, for example, if I say which is the current version of the BotBuilder SDK, I say it's 3.0, but 4.0 will be GA soon. I can save that. It's right now here. Unfortunately, I can't show you the Q&A maker knowledge base or the Q&A maker backend side right now because I don't have the credentials with me for the service account, which we're using for the Q&A maker stuff. But if I right now, that's not thing I wanted to do. I now ask her that question. There are either two chances. Either the service was fast enough and it already updated the knowledge base in the backend, and she'll respond with the correct answer, or doesn't get any answers and she'll respond with, unfortunately, no answer has been found. So the answer is not populated right now, but if I ask the bot, then take this new question which I entered 12 minutes before the meetup. Yeah, now she won't respond me anymore until function is done. Okay, forget about it. But that's the demo log I already have. So basically spoken, if you would think about the service would work, it should look like this: that you have your SharePoint list. Whenever something changes on the SharePoint list, there's a webhook triggers an Azure function. The Azure function triggers another Azure function which updates a Q&A maker knowledge base, and the bot on the other side would query the Q&A maker knowledge base and get the results instantly with translation, with language understanding intelligence service as well. If I would have my bot not only being for the use case of querying a Q&A maker database, but also do other stuff, I could also combine Q&A maker and Louis in order to detect the intents of the user, and if it's like a Q&A intent, then I'll make a REST call to the Q&A maker API, and if it's another intent, like, I don't know, get me the latest 5 emails I got in my inbox, I would query the graph or anything else. So I can basically use Lewis as a hub for then forwarding the backend logic to the correct service. So that was basically it from my side. Almost on time. As I said, if you have any questions, contact me directly on Twitter, LinkedIn, email, whatever. I'll send the slide deck to the organizers, and I hope they'll forward it to you guys. Have a nice day. It's like, as you can see, it's 1 a.m. At my time, so I'll go to bed right now. Have a nice day, have a nice evening, and enjoy the second session. Thanks, guys.
Ich bin Wilhelm. So, so that was entertaining. Thanks much, Stephan, even though he can't hear us. Please contact him and let him know. Andy, do you have a microphone? There you go. All right. So, any interesting insights that you learned there while Andy's getting set up? Somebody's got to have something to say. That was a good use, and in Europe that would be much more important than it is here. Although it may be able to understand, like, South Philly dialects or something, that might help. So has anybody written any bots? Will you get ready? Anybody else have actually tried any of this stuff? Just a little tiny bit. All right, well, Andy's going to show you some of the real code behind this, and I think Stephan did a good overview there. Fascinating how you cobble all this stuff together from all the building blocks that Microsoft provides. So that's useful. So while Andy's getting ready, you, sir, come up here.
Andy's ready.
You, sir. Tell everybody what's going on.
What's going on?
I think he means the shirt you're wearing.
Tech Bash is going on.
They don't know what Tech Bash
Tech Bash is
you think that everyone knows.
I'll tell him.
Yeah, it's in the Poconos. It's a 3-day plus a pre-conference day this year. It's October 2nd to the 5th. And we're going to have good food, water slides, a lot of great sessions. We've got Scott Hunter from Microsoft coming out to keynote it this year. Jeff Fritz, you all know Jeff, will be up there to do a welcome session for us. And, the developer conference. It's like this, but
it's during the middle of the week.
Yes.
And how much does it cost?
How much is it?
Like $349, $399.
$3.99.
I don't know the price.
$3.99 for 3 days, and you can go to techbash.com.
That's right.
And sign up
Sign
now.
up.
What are the exact 3 days that
The exact, if you buy the 3-day ticket, it's October 3rd, 4th, and 5th.
Up on your screen there, by the way, some of the website.
There you go.
If you buy the 4-day ticket, you come on the 2nd. And we have full-day workshops, Azure, Docker, ASP.NET Core,
Azure, Docker, ASP.NET Core, and DevOps.
DevOps. That's right.
Full-day sessions. It's going to be an awesome conference at the largest indoor water park in the country, up in the Poconos. And you can go to a conference and see all the world-class speakers without having to fly across the country. Save your boss some money.
There you go. Well done, sir.
Alvin's got some cards if anybody wants to save the date cards.
There you go. Save the date. It's like getting married here. All right, so we're going to finish up this evening with Andy Schwam, local MVP, and he's going to actually show you some of the coding side of making bots in C#, correct?
I am.
Excellent.
Yeah. And okay. So hey, how's everybody doing tonight? So before I get started, you guys just watched Stephan's presentation. It is not easy to do a presentation when you can't hear the audience, right? He's sort of running blind there. He did a really good job. I really enjoyed that talk, and I hope you guys did as well. It's not easy to do it the way he did. I'll also tell you that a lot of the stuff he talked about will feed right into this talk, so I think it's really going to work out really well. A little bit about me, what you really need to know, because I'm going to be talking quickly, and I have a lot to get through in the 1 hour that I have. What's really important here is that my Twitter handle is @Schwami, and my blog is www.schwamisays.net. And if you go there, you will find the slide deck from tonight and a link to my GitHub repo where you can get the application, files and stuff like that. So check that out. And if you have any questions, feel free to contact me. Having said that, I'm going to keep moving along. We talked about Tech Bash, so I'm not going to spend any time on that. And the reason I don't need to spend a lot of time on Tech Bash is because I'm going to demo the bot for Tech Bash. So you guys are going to be hearing a lot about Tech Bash, all right? We're obviously trying to plug that event, but the bot that I've written is the Tech Bash bot. And so I'm going to get right into the first demo. And I'm going to go over to Azure. So in Azure, I have a bot service, right? And this is a lot of the stuff that Stephan had, touched upon, and some of the things he didn't show, but I'm showing some of this stuff here. I happen to have two bot services in here right now, but the Tech Bash bot is the one we're going to go into. If I go into this, I've got a variety of options in here. One of the options in here is to set the channels that Stephan had touched upon a little bit as well. So I can have my bot talk to Cortana, to Skype, to Teams. I can have my bot do all that kind of stuff. And it's pretty easy to wire that up. I won't be doing that tonight, though. Tonight I'm going to focus on simple web bot. And you can see that my bot is currently connected to channels using the web chat channel. So I can test it that way. I can also actually go right into this thing, and I'm not going to do a lot with this, but you can click on Build, and you can actually open the code right in Azure and edit it right in Azure if you wanted to. Probably not the best scenario for a robust project, but you can do it. You can look at things there. What I am going to do is go in and test it in web chat. That's what the button I just clicked is, and it's going to go in there. And okay, so it started up. So what I've got here on the right side of my screen is actually, it's the web chat, meaning like if I had it on a website, it would look like sort of like this UI or smaller or whatever it is, but I'm using a UI right here, hosted right in Azure to talk to my bot. And so I can ask it questions like, what is Tech Bash? Because this is the Tech Bash bot, right? What is Tech Bash? And we already know, hey, mine worked. All right, good. Gods are with me today, right? It says Tech Bash is a conference for developers, blah, blah, blah. It tells you what Tech Bash is. I can ask it, when is Tech Bash? You guys already know because we were just talking about that. But when is Tech Bash? And it responds back slowly. Come on, there it is. Tech Bash is October 2nd to the 5th. So you get the idea. It can answer questions for me, right? This is using that Q&A feature that Stephan talked about in the previous presentation, and I will go into that in more detail today. But what you'll also notice is that I asked it questions, and it responded to me in text, plain text. We can also do more, and so I'll ask it a different type of question, and you can see. So if I was thinking about attending Tech Bash, I might want to know, are there any sessions about Azure? Nope, got to spell it right. That would help. Are there any sessions about Azure? And it brings me back a list of sessions, and these are just the ones that have Azure in the title. And you can see we've got Jeff Fritz doing a talk, and Joe Guadagno, Richard Taylor, all doing talk. Azure's a good topic. But the point here is what you see is this isn't regular plain text. This is the adaptive cards that we just heard about, and I'll get into a little bit about that later. But this is sort of richer text. You can see some bold fonts in here. You can even see that I have buttons on here, right? Now, I didn't know exactly what Stephan was going to talk about beforehand, but it really is working out really well, right? Nice lead-in. So, okay, so I've got that. I've asked it any sessions about Azure. I can say any, but we want to use natural language processing, right? I don't know how people are going to ask the questions. I said, are there any talks about Azure? You might say any sessions session, not talks. Oh, sorry, I did talk. Any talks about or on, let's use different words, on tools. I don't know, right? Hopefully this works. Okay, great. I got 2 talks on tools. Alice Brosey is doing a talk. Doug Mayer is doing a talk. So, okay, I've asked it different things. How about this? When is Bill presenting? And it says, oh, yeah, Bill's doing his React Angular View talk, right? You with me there, Bill? Bill's doing his talk. No. Oh, by the way, yeah, the schedule is not. I meant to say that. I just hard coded in a schedule because we haven't released that yet. You're not. Yeah, I meant to tell you that beforehand. Don't worry. The schedule's not set, but the talks are set. So yes, these talks will be there. How about this one? Any talks by Scott? And I say, okay. Oh, it is Scott. There's a few different Scotts that are speaking. Scott Hunter's doing the keynote. Scott K will be there doing some talks. Okay. So I've asked it a different couple of conversations. There's one more conversation I want to demonstrate with it. I might ask, let's say I already went to Tech Bash and I loved Scott Hunter's keynote. So I want to do some feedback. So I say feedback for Scott. Okay. It's going to say, well, we have 3 Scotts that spoke. Which Scott are you talking about? I'll say, oh, thanks, Scott Hunter. Remember, and he talked about this in the previous session as well. Now I've got this choice here. I don't have to type the response. I can click the response, which is nice, right? Which session would you like to evaluate? I could have checked to see he only had 1, but in this case, I didn't put that logic in yet. I'm saying I want to do the keynote, and now it says, well, how would you rate the speaker's presentation skills? It's Scott Hunter, of course. He's getting a 5, right? I mean, can't go wrong there. And I'll say his content was a 5, and I can go back and say, great. Oops, sorry, any feedback? And I'll just say, well, I mean, no, it's not. Then I wouldn't have the demo, right? So now I want you to pay attention to the last response that got bigger. It said, thanks for providing feedback for keynote presented by Scott Hunter. It's aware of the state, right? It's keeping track of things. I told it Scott Hunter a while ago, and I picked the talk, and so I wanted to go through that flow for you to see that it is stateful. And that's really important. The bot has to be, okay? So that's my presentation on the first demo here about how that bot works, and I hope you guys will all be coming to Tech Bash, but let's move on from there. Did I say Tech Bash? Yeah, okay, I just want to make sure. So what's next? What am I going to do next? Let's go back to my slide here. I talked about that, and I did the demo. Okay, good. So what I'm going to do next is go right in and create a new bot from scratch so we can see what that experience is like. In order to do that, I do have to install, well, I did. I'm not going to do it now. I'm trying to do things as quickly as possible, so I've got a few things baked behind the scenes, okay? So what I would do is I would come in here and do File, New, Project, and I have installed the template, right? Because your Visual Studio doesn't have this one out of the box, but you can install the template. My slides have links to all this stuff. But I'm going to say I want to create the Echo with a BotBuilder Echo Bot V4. My demos are using V4, and if you remember in the last presentation, he mentioned V3 is the current production ready, V4 is in preview. But it's dramatically different than V3, and I think it's really cool, and it's a good way to go. And I'm focusing on the sort of pre-release version here. So I would click that. I'm not going to because I actually have it open right here. Here's the Echo Bot. So let's take a look at what I get when I just did that File, New, Project. It created Echo Bot for me. Before we do anything, let's run Echo Bot. Its name may give away a little bit of a secret about how smart it is. But I'm going to run this bot, and when I do that, it's going to pop open just a web page to tell me that it's running. And then I'm going to go down to the Bot Framework Emulator V4. So this is an emulator that works against the bot framework and has a lot of really cool features in here. I'm going to connect to the Echo Bot, which I've already configured, but it's like all you do is give it the URL that was on this page right here, this little URL right here. I give it that, and I can communicate to it, and I can say, what else? Hello, world. And my bot responds to me, turn 1, you said hello, world. And if I say, well, yo, Philly, how you doing? It says turn 2, you sent Yo, Philly. Well, the bot is called the Echo bot, right? It doesn't do a whole lot out of the box, okay? It echoed back what I said. But notice it's got this numeric value here. It's keeping track. It's proving to you that this bot is also stateful, okay? It knows what number we're on, which isn't really super smart. But hey, we can build more onto it from there. So now we've seen the Echo bot in action. Let's go back and take a look at the Echo bot and the code for it. All right. So first thing we can see, if we look at this, if anyone's done any work with .NET Core and ASP.NET, this might look familiar. This has a www root folder. It has a startup and a program. This is an ASP.NET Core app, right? And if I take a look at it, it has the program, and the program just starts up the web host. This is sort of standard and not really all that relevant to bot. Yeah, sorry, thanks. Let me bump the text. I should have done that beforehand. Font. Thank you. And I'll just go to like 18 and see how that looks. The bot should know. Yeah, I should be able to type into the bot and say, change the font. I guess I could do that. So, all right, so I've got this program. Program call startup. So startup, like any other thing that we're used to seeing in .NET Core now for ASP.NET, we've got startup, which loads the configuration. And again, I'm not going to go into a lot of details on this stuff because I want to focus on the bot features specifically. When you go down to configure services, which is a common thing that you see, and by the way, who's worked with .NET Core and ASP.NET Core? A handful, right? So this looks familiar to you guys, right? Those of you, if you haven't, this is the way you configure applications with .NET Core and ASP.NET Core, I should say. The first thing we see here is services.addBot. All right, we got some bot code here. Add bot, and we're adding the bot that is the Echo bot. Okay, and Echo bot is over here in this class, echobot.c#, right? We'll come back to that. Next, we see it load some credentials. Okay, again, you're getting this code. If you just start it up, you're going to get this code, and this is kind of boilerplate stuff. This is going to load the credentials because my bot, when I'm running it locally, needs to talk to Azure, so it needs to have the credentials for where I'm hosting it. Okay, great. Down to some middleware, and they put a whole bunch of comments in here, and there's some middleware that catches exceptions. And what does it do? It prints it out and says, sorry, it looks like something went wrong. It sends that out. Context. So we're working in this bot context all the time. And when you see send activity and text, basically that's the bot returning text to you. Okay? So the bot said, sorry, it looks like something went wrong. I would suggest that you enhance that code and do some logging or something more intelligent, but okay, they're giving you a placeholder for that. The next part is important as well, and there's this section here where we're creating this thing called a new memory storage, okay? I said the bot is stateful. Now, this memory storage that we get out of the box is just that. It's like an in-memory storage. So if I start my app, it'll keep track of things in memory. Every time I restart my app, I've lost my memory, right? It's not really a strong way to keep state. What really you're supposed to do, and they show you even here, is use either an Azure table storage or use Azure blob storage. They're pretty easy to configure, but they can't do that out of the box because they would need to know the credentials for my Azure blob storage or my Azure table storage. But all I would have to do is uncomment this stuff and it would, and give it the connection string and it would work. So, okay. So I set up some memory. Question? Do I know if there's a provider for Cervix Fabric? I have no idea on that. It's a good question. I do not know the answer. They recommend using things like blob storage and stuff. That's what I read. Haven't heard that yet. So, okay, so I've got a couple things in middleware. Then I'm adding that to middleware. I'm adding this data store, right? And I've got a strongly typed state object that gets serialized into state. And if we look at that, what does it have? It has that turn count, right? And that's that number that increased each time I talk to the bot. So it's really not that complicated, but it's strongly typed, and that's kind of cool. I can put whatever I want in there. So now I've got this thing, and now my bot is pretty much ready to roll. So when I communicate with the bot, it calls this thing, that class, Echo bot, and this is the bot. And, it's not super complicated. We know that already. The first thing you see is this method called onTurn. This is like your This is your go-to method for everything with the bot. The turn is like the turn of the conversation. Maybe it comes from turn of a phrase. I don't know why. They call it a turn. So I ask the bot a question and it responds. That's a turn. I may ask it to do something for me and it responds. That's a turn, right? These are the turns of the bot. Okay. And then here's that context. I mentioned that briefly earlier. So it gets passed automatically into the turn, the context. I then can look at the activity of the context. And I can look at that activity. I can do a bunch of things. I can determine the type of this communication. In my case, it's a message. And message is the one that used the most. Message is like the default, like text back and forth. But there are events that you can trigger back and forth with the bot. It will send some activity when a new user joins the conversation. Maybe I'm in group chat and people are coming and going, and so that would be an activity that is not a message. There's even a type for like a typing, like, you know, those little dots that kind of squiggle when someone's typing and you want to see something cool. So you can send that back to the user so that it looks like the bot is thinking and the bot is typing. You know, okay, great. So I've got the fact that it's a message. Then I grab state out of I get the conversation state of the type echo state, and I've saved that here. Again, this is like sort of standard code, right? And then I take that state and I increase the turn count, okay? And then I have context.send activity. And I said before, when I do send activity, it's just sending back this text, right? We've seen that in action before, right? It just sends back what I said to it and increases the turn count. That's the basics of a bot, okay? Not a super smart bot, but that's a bot, okay? So we've got that. Everybody cool with that so far? We've seen. Yeah, so the question is, what happens when you have 3 people at a time? Yeah, so I've not worked on a multi-user bot. And the question is, you know, what happens if you have multiple users? So it is stateful within users and stuff like that. It knows a lot. The state is pretty rich. But I haven't really dealt with the complexities of that kind of communication, because you really have to change a lot when you have multiple people talking at once. And that's, you know, sort of, I think, can actually bring me into my next slide. It's a good segue. I think I have this here. Tips for building a bot, right? And that'll sort of go to the last tip a little bit. But the first tip is, don't pretend to be real, right? It's a big mistake that companies make a lot, is they have a bot and they don't let you know that it's not a human. You know, they sort of pretend to be a human, right? Now, the last example, that bot had a nice human name, but it was obviously not a human. I mean, they had a mocked up avatar to show that it was like fun, right? Yeah, Ich bin Sally, right? And that's the right way to do it. I've used bots, and you know, you kind of get on pretty quick. Like, I have a feeling I'm not talking to a person, right? Have you guys had that experience? It doesn't seem right. So you've kind of lost trust with your customer right off the bat, or your user. You know, we'll use that phrase, customer, right? In the last talk, he mentioned monitoring and retraining your bot. It's really important to stay with that bot and keep track of the questions that maybe get asked, and find out what you can do is, and I'm not going to demo this today, but you can log everything that goes back and forth, right? Every question and every answer, every response, every, you know, whatever. And you want to look at that and say, well, does it look like the users are getting what they wanted to get from this bot? And you want to keep retraining it and work with that. The next tip is be prepared for silly questions. There's some blog posts you'll find out there if you search around that talk about the most common questions asked of every bot. And for some reason, people always do it. I don't know if you guys have ever done it, but people always say, tell me a joke. Come on, you know, like, who cares? You're here to do, you know, whatever. But people say, tell me a joke. They'll say, what is 2 + 2? What time is it? They always ask those questions. So you know what? Program for them. Tell them a joke, right? The bot says, who are you? Give some information. Hey, I'm a bot, you know, whatever, right? Just try to have a little fun with it, right? And then obviously you have to get your work done, but have a little fun. And then the last one kind of goes to the question that was asked about multiple users and things like that. A lot of these little pieces I'm going to show are easy. I talk about this a lot in my presentations. I always say, I'm going to show you something that's easy. Then I'm going to show you something else that's easy. I'm going to show you a third thing that's easy. But putting them all together is really hard, right? Making a conversational bot is really complicated. And a good way of showing that, if you think about it, is imagine I was doing that feedback for the Scott Hunter talk, and it said, would you like to provide a comment? And in the text I go, what time is it? Or, oh, can I buy a ticket? And the bot says, I don't understand what you're doing. Right? You just changed our brains don't work like bots do, right? Our brains, we're all over the place. I am, as you can tell, right? I'm all over the place. Hopefully you're a little more, I'm a little ADD. Maybe you're not. But we change our mind. So what you get at is what you hope you realize is that dealing with these things is complicated, right? Whereas if we had a web form or a form in Xamarin app or something like that, an app, there's only certain text boxes and you have to follow those things, or you can hit the back button if you want. So your bot needs to learn and understand words like help and like change my mind or can I go back and things like that. Sir. Yeah, the question is, could I have put in something to the bot that recognizes the text and said the text doesn't look right, and say to the user, hey, can we come back to this and do exactly, sure, you can do that. You don't have to do that. But if you don't, you're going to have a problem, right? So that's the way to be thinking. You have to be always dealing with, well, what if, right? What if? Okay, so that's a little bit about tips for building a bot. I'm going to keep an eye on the clock here. Let's see what time it is. All right, good. So next thing we're going to do is we're going to go into Lewis. And you heard Lewis mentioned also in the previous talk. Lewis is the language understanding service. Okay. Before I do this, let's go back to my bot here. And let's imagine that I wanted this bot to do more. Maybe it wants to be my tech bash bot. So let's say I'm going to put some other code in here. I have some stuff like just snuck down here. So could you imagine if you had to write a bot that had code in here that looked like this? The text is, when is Steve speaking? And if when is Steve speaking occurs, it goes and looks up the sessions and it returns Steve's sessions, right? And then it says, or they asked, when is Steve Boland speaking? Okay, I would look up the sessions for him. Well, I've got a lot of speakers, and I've got a lot of different ways to ask that question. So this looks kind of inefficient. I hope that jumped out at you right away. This is an inefficient way to do things. Plus, we're not only talking about when are people speaking. What if they say, I'd like to provide feedback for a session? How many different ways can you envision that a user might say these things? This is not a way to write a bot, right? So we have to use some tools that are at our disposal, and luckily they are here for us to use. Let's just get rid of that. Not that it matters, because we're not going to use this bot again. So that brings us to Lewis, the language understanding service. Okay. As mentioned earlier, we'll say it's lewis.ai is the website. It's the language understanding service, and you need a separate account for that. I have a feeling, I wonder about some of these like websites like lewis.ai, and we'll see another one soon. I have a feeling maybe one day, again, this is just my thought, maybe there'll be like Azure proper one day. I don't know. They seem like everything else is in Azure. These are Azure services, right? So who knows? You need an account. Lewis can be trained to understand intents, entities, and phrase lists. What is an intent? Well, when I was asking about when is Steve speaking, that's an intent. The intent I'm trying to get at is I want to know something about the schedule, right? When I said I want to give feedback, I want to do is evaluate. My intent is to do an evaluation, right? So Lewis helps with that. Let's take a look at Lewis. It is really cool. So I go to Lewis. I go to the Lewis homepage. Again, I'm going to go quickly through these things because we don't have a whole lot of time, but this is to give you a taste. I'm in Lewis. I go to my apps in Lewis. I have one called Tech Bash. And you can see I have 4 intents listed here. And I hope you guys can see that okay. I can zoom for some things if we need to, right? I've got 4 intents. My evaluation intent, my none intent, we'll talk about that in a second, registration and schedule, right? So those are the sort of main features that I showed with my bot. Well, I didn't show registration, but I didn't demonstrate that. But that's one of the other features. So none, if I look over here, you can also see that none is the only one that I don't get ellipsis for. I can't delete it. I can't change it. And that's the one that comes out of the box. You create a Lewis app, you get a none intent. And none is the place where it sends you when it doesn't know what you're talking about, which is pretty helpful because sometimes things don't fit into any of these intents, right? That's what none intent is for. So let's come back. We'll talk about that, I think, a little bit more. Let's look at the registration intent. So the whole idea here is I want to add what are called utterances. How might someone ask the question about registering for Tech Bash? Tech Bash, by the way, is a conference in the Poconos in October. Yeah, I did that. Okay. Come on. All right. So I've got a bunch of different questions in here, and I try to think about how might someone ask, can I get tickets? How to attend? Sometimes people speak in full sentences. It's a bot. They can type whatever they want. They may think they have to talk in certain full sentences. They may just type the word register, right? Or how to register for Tech Bash, or sign up, ticket, ticks, right? Instead of tickets, ticks. So there's different ways people might ask the question. So what you do is you provide it with a bunch of utterances like this, and then you train the bot, right? You train it like you would train any machine learning model, right? If you've done anything with that kind of stuff, you build a model, and that's what we're doing under the covers. It builds a model for me. So I train it, and then I can come over here and I can test it right in the UI. I can say, can I get tickets? And what returns to me, and I know this is probably hard to see, so I'll zoom in on some of that. What it returns to me is right here. There we go. Registration point. Whoa. All right. I can't underline very well with my mouse pad, but it's 0.9. That means it's got a confidence of 90%. It's pretty sure that I want the registration intent. Okay. So then I can ask it, how to attend. Right. And as you can guess, these are going to be pretty strong because I'm typing exactly what I gave it already. Right. So, but I can say, here's one that says sign up. So can I say, let's hope it gets this one right. Can I sign up? It's not doing exact word matching. Can I sign up? And its registration, it's at 89%. It's a little lower because it's not an exact match, but hey, it's in the right place. Now, if I also asked it, well, when is Scott speaking? Oh, good. You can't see that, right? This is UI was not made for demos, right? But it's got the schedule, right? It knew that was something different. All right, we're talking about the registration intent here, but yeah, that worked. Okay, let's give it something else, like, can I, how about this one? Buy a ticket. Okay, so when I give it buy a ticket, I'm not going to zoom in because it takes a while, but 0.6, it's kind of right. It's right. It's in registration, but 0.6 means it's not really confident because I haven't given it that word buy yet. And it doesn't know the word buy, but it's in the right space. And if I was to say, can I buy a ticket? Oh, no, how about this one? Can I buy a pass, right? Or something like conference pass. It's completely wrong. It's giving me the schedule intent, right? Yeah, you do not need to bring a towel, but that's a good question that I could put into this. That is a good one. Can I buy a pass? No, it doesn't understand that at all. So let's simply train it on can I buy a pass, right? Even though we don't necessarily call them. And you can see that when I'm adding that utterance, it's really confused because it's at 0.10, right? It's not really strong about that. It's because I haven't really trained it yet. So I'm going to train my bot, and it trains pretty quickly, especially on small data like this. Done. I can test it. And now, refreshing. Okay, now when I say, can I buy a pass? It works at 90%. And if I go back to the other one, like buy a ticket, even that's gotten better now, and it's at 90%. Because it's not exact matching on these words, right? It's taking that whole language, that whole, well, it's not really keywords, but it's like that whole, vocabulary. That's the word I was looking for. It's sort of building a whole vocabulary off this and thinking about different ways that a person might ask. So cool. So I've got my registration intent. Now, let's take a look at a more complicated intent, which is the schedule intent, right? And I'll show you what I've got there. And I want to get rid of this. And I want to get this button back because it always goes into the wrong view. So remember when I asked it about, I'm calling this the schedule intent. But it might be, I want to find out about who's speaking or topics, but it all goes into what I'm calling the schedule intent. Any sessions about Azure, I've asked it. I've said, are there any Azure talks at 1500 military time? Are there any DevOps sessions at 1? So you notice I'm using different words, sort of different nouns, different verbs, like I'm trying to change up the way I say it. You'll also, of course, notice that some words are blue in here. So what this is showing me is entities that have been identified. And so what I'm going to do real quick is I'm going to go in and I'm going to remove this label. And now it says any sessions about Azure. So at one point I went up at the top and I said any sessions about Azure, enter, and that came up in the line. And then I said, well, I need to know that word Azure. Okay, my intent is schedule, but I need to know when I pass this information back to my bot that the user didn't just want the schedule intent, they wanted the schedule intent, but something to do with Azure. Because I need to now to query my database for talks that have Azure, right? So you come in here and I can configure that and I can say it is a topic, right? Topic is an entity, right? If I look over here in entity, you'll see I have a few entities. I have the topic entity, the speaker entity, so it knows to parse out the speaker names out of there, the date time, and I've got the speaker full name, and that is sort of complicated. That's because it sees the word, let's say Bill Wolf was a speaker. It sees Bill as a word and Wolf as a word, and it'll recognize them as speakers, but I need to sort of combine them as a full speaker name. It's a little weird, but it makes sense when you get into it, get into it. So all right, so I've got these topics. So I go back to my intent, my schedule intent, and you can see I've asked it a variety of types of things. If I go to some of these other ones, I've got, I know what to do. So I can toggle this back and go into what's called token view, and you can see that that's token view. This is the one I want. This is entities view, and you can see that it's sort of taken out the values I've put in, and it recognizes them as entities, right? If I go to the end, it says things like, here's a good one, like any talks about topic by this speaker, right? And if I look at it with the entities turned off, I typed in any talks about bots by Chris Gomez. Hey, Chris, I used your name in here. It doesn't matter what name I used a name, right? But again, going back to my silly example for before, I don't want to put an intent in here, an utterance with every single person's name, right? That's a problem. So here's what I did, and it's so cool. This is where like this Lewis stuff just makes our jobs easier. It's a great service. I said, when are talks about Azure, and I labeled Azure as a topic. Then I went into the phrase lists, and I created a phrase list called topic. And I put in all of these topics in here, cloud, SaaS, Azure, JavaScript. I put in all these words, and it recognizes them as synonyms. Not really synonyms, I shouldn't say that, but like interchangeable, meaning if one is a topic, then these others are topics, okay? And I put in a whole bunch of words in here, right? A whole bunch of words. And then it's actually pretty cool. Let me show you. If I created a new phrase list, like let's say it was a new topic 2, right? And I type in things like C#, comma, right? It's comma separated. I put in VB.net. Why not? Does anybody use that? JavaScript. So let's say these are my topics I put in. I could put Pascal in there, right? Well, so here's the thing. Notice it added these 3 over here, but then it also gave me some related values. It's doing machine learning behind the scenes and saying, hey, if those were topics, maybe these are topics too. Yeah, you know what? As a matter of fact, they're pretty good. We probably would want these as topics. So I'll say add them, and it's going to keep giving me more and more of them, right? WordPress, sure, why not? Now, the interesting thing here is you could say, we don't have any talks on WordPress. Why would you add WordPress? Well, if someone comes to my bot and asks the question, do you have any talks on WordPress? I wanted to understand that WordPress is in fact a topic, but when we query the database, we're not going to find anything. But that's an important difference, right? It is a topic, right? So I want it to be seen that way. So, okay, so I did that. And then I have these speaker names, and I put these speaker names in. What I did is I parsed them. So you can see in this one, Paul Hacker. I don't know if you guys like this line here. I put in Paul Hacker and Paul Hacker, right? Because I want him to be seen in all those different ways. And really, I should be putting in things like Pete, like you see Pete Brown below. He spoke there last year, 2 years ago. I should probably put in Peter as well and let it sort of recognize like that's a possible option, right? But hopefully you get the idea. I've got these names. And so now if I go to my intent over here and I go back to this tester and I say something, oh, I made a change because I was goofing around. So let me go back and train it again real quick and I'll test it real quick. How are we doing on time? Oh yeah, we're getting there. So if I go back and now say any talks about Azure by Bill, let's do that, right? So yeah, it came back with the schedule intent, but if I expand this a little bit, you can see that it parsed out the topic and the speaker, right? So the way the bot's going to work is that every request that comes into the bot, it's going to pass out to Lewis to figure out the intent. It's going to come back to the bot, and it's going to say, well, this is a schedule intent, and here are the two sort of objects that you need to know about, right? Here are the tokens and stuff like that, right? So makes it really cool and easy to work with. Let me see where I need to be going here with this thing. Did that. Lewis demo. Okay, so I'm going to go right in and show you some code. Let's take a look at some code. So my bot is a little bit more complicated than that little Echo bot, but still similar, right? I still have the startup and the different things. I'm going to go into my conference bot. Oh, you know what? Is there something else in here I want to show? Maybe. Yeah. Well, I'm doing dependency injection, right? Oh, okay. So not only do I have, no, not that. I have dialogues, right? I have 3 dialogues over here. Hopefully you guys can see that okay. I have the schedule dialogue, the session evaluation dialogue, and the ticket info dialogue. I don't want to have one big sort of piece of code that does everything. So I've got these things separated into different dialogues, and you'll see the way they work when we get into them. But you know, this thing supports dependency injection, so I've where am I? So in my conference bot, in my startup, I've configured dependency injection for my dialogues and my service. The session service, that's the thing that queries the database to, you know, find out when people are talking and things like that. And the rest of this is pretty similar, but I've added middleware. I've added another piece of middleware called the Lewis Recognizer middleware, and I've given it those values that are in there. That's the app ID and the subscription key for my Lewis service, right? In the interest of time, I'm not going to show where that comes from, but when you build a Lewis app, you get that value. And that's what gives this thing permission to talk to Lewis, right? That's important. But not only permission, but I've added that Lewis middleware. So by adding that Lewis middleware, it's going to route everything right up to Lewis for me, okay? So what will then happen is it'll go to Lewis, and it will come back to my bot. And you can see I've got my dialogues in here that I need to use because I'm going to redirect to them. This is important, right? I've got this collection of dialogues, and I've added them. Each one has like a key and the dialogue. So the schedule dialogue has the key schedule. The ticket info dialogue has the key ticket info. Right? I think you guys get that. Hope you can get that. So next we come to our on turn method. Remember, on turn. This is where everything goes back and forth on turn. I'm going to kind of skim through some of this, but we're getting my state like we did before. We're going to have to create this context because it's a little bit more complicated. But what I really want to show is when it comes down to here, and it gets the data. This context.services.get recognize a result is getting that stuff from Lewis, right? And it's going to take it, and I don't know why it has to be a 2-step process, but again, this is just the way the framework works. I take that result and I make this TechBash Lewis Recognizer result. I named it something long, but it's specific. And I took that result and I turned it into this thing. And when I do that, I've got an object that now understands like entities, topics, speakers, dates, things like that. Cool. And then I have this switch statement, right? And this is a pretty common pattern to see in a bot that uses Lewis. And there's a couple different ways to do this, but this is common. So what it does is it takes the recognizer result and basically says, well, what's the intent? Was it registration? Was it schedule? Oh, it was schedule. Okay. Then let's go down, switch case to there. And this basically takes and dialog context.begin, the schedule dialog. Remember, because I used that, it's the key value pair of dialogues. and it takes these arguments and it passes the recognized result in there, so that my schedule dialog, I go into here, it's going to now, when it comes in here, and all this stuff is asynchronous, right? And so there's some things you have to keep in mind with all this asynchronous stuff, and it's also sort of dynamic and things like that. So what happens is it has args. It doesn't know yet that they are my specific kind of arguments that have topics and names and stuff in there. It doesn't know that yet. So I convert it here to a tech bash recognizer result, this whole thing, and now I've got it, right? And then all this code here is really not important, right? This code is taking and doing the querying for me. All this stuff here is related to querying my database. And I'm calling my session service, get sessions, and I'm passing in the speaker names and the date time and blah, blah, blah. I don't need to show you guys how I use Entity Framework to query, right? That happens, we got that. I get back a list of sessions that match the query. And then, remember those were using the adaptive cards. These were using that rich text functionality where they look kind of nice. I mean, I didn't go crazy with it. So I loop through all the sessions and I call this adapter and I turn them into cards, right? Adaptive cards. And I'm not going to have time to show a lot about adaptive cards tonight, but I do have a slide that has the link to it. You can go to the website and you can check out how to build those cards. It's pretty easy. Okay, great. So I got that. And then I take those cards and I sort of turn them into this activity and I do context. We're always back on that context object. Dot. And instead of, what was it before? Send message? Or I forget even really what it's called. Send activity is going to send those cards back. And my dialog is done. And then I do DC dialog context dot end. Because this is a simple dialog. There's only one turn here. I asked it for sessions, it gave me the results, and it's done. Now, if I ask it for more sessions, I ask it again, that's okay, but that's a new turn coming back to that same dialog again. So dialog context dot end, and it's done. Okay? So that is a very simple, it really is kind of a simple example, because it's not complex. It's a one single conversation, simple conversation. So I want to take a couple quick minutes and show the session evaluation example, which, if you remember, had multiple questions, right? And multiple prompts. The best way to demonstrate this is to debug. So I'm going to do that now. I've got 12 minutes. So I'm going to go back to my emulator, which is pretty cool, and I'll switch over to my conference bot. And I'll say feedback for a session. And so boom. So we came in here. So what happened when I did that? It skipped a little bit, right? We know that it went to this bot, and that bot figured out what the intent was, right? Lewis figured out what the intent is, and then it routed it to the evaluation intent right here. Session evaluation, and it did that. And then it comes into here. And so the first step, I named it, right? I've got a bunch of steps in this thing. The first step, you can see here, by the way, when I created my session evaluation dialog, I create a collection of these steps, right? And so naming them is a little weird, but I call this the speaker name step. And essentially what this does is, let's assume that this code gets skipped, because I'll show that later. This code gets skipped, and it goes right down to here, and it says, await, everything's asynchronous. And I'll try to scroll this up a little bit so you guys can see that better. Await, and it gives you, now it says dialog context dot prompt. Prompt is a little different, because now prompt says I'm expecting an answer. I'm not just giving you information, I'm expecting an answer. Which speaker would you like to evaluate? All right, cool. Let's run through that. And it says in my bot over here, which speaker would you like to evaluate? I'm going to say Scott. Why not? So I come back, and now it automatically comes into the next step, which is called the speaker confirm step. Why? Because I know I have more than one speaker named Scott. So it looks in the args that were passed in, and it gets the value out, and it got that word Scott right there, okay? And then I have this data query kind of thing that goes and gets all the speakers named Scott. It comes back, and it creates this list of choices for me, okay? It's a simple, object that's provided by the framework called a choice, and all I'm doing is adding the speaker name into the choice. But this time, I have dialog context dot prompt with the type of pick list, okay? and you'll see what I get when it returns this choices to the pick list. And we kind of saw this before, right? Shouldn't be too big a surprise. Hey, Scott Hunter, Scott K, Scott McAllister. I know that's kind of hard to see from the back. Oh, can you guys see the bottom from the back a little bit? Okay. I'm trying to go quick. So I go Scott Hunter, and it comes into the next spot, right? And this time, I know it's Scott Hunter, so I get the choice result. I get the choice result has a, oh, I didn't go down that far, sorry. Choice result has a value of Scott Hunter. This time, I'm going to add it to the state, to the active dialogue state. Because remember, at the end of this thing, it goes back. It needs to know, eventually, I don't actually save these evaluations to a database, but later down the road, it's got to save this stuff and remember which speaker and topic I'm talking about, all that stuff. So, okay, it does that. Then it gets the sessions, and what does it do? It creates another pick list, and it goes on and on. And I don't need to show each step of the way because those are like the concepts, right? And it goes back and back and back. But, so let me see where I'm at now. So that was the Lewis recognizer. So I talked a little bit about the design of this thing. A question gets asked, Lewis determines the intent, back it goes to the bot. Talked about managing these conversation flows with dialogues. There's a couple of dialogues I didn't show. I talked about a text prompt, like I want the word Scott. A choice prompt, like which Scott. Number prompt, date time prompt, confirm prompt is where you say like, are you sure? Right? And it says okay or yes, and those kind of things. And even attachment prompts. I can say, please upload that Excel spreadsheet now. And it will accept that Excel spreadsheet, like that kind of stuff. So I showed this already. I showed the single step and the multiple step. The multiple step thing that I just showed, by the way, that's called a waterfall. I don't know why it's called a waterfall. That's the name they came up with it. That's just what it's called. And then I want to real quick show the Q&A maker. And Stephan also touched upon that earlier. So what I tend to do a lot of times is use my Q&A as my fallback. Anytime I don't know what they might want, maybe I'm going to go to the Q&A maker and see if it finds a response there. And so what I have is that none intent. When I go back over here, when it comes back with none from Lewis, I'm going to connect right here to my Q&A maker, right? That code connects to Q&A and queries the Q&A, and I'll show you how that whole thing works, but it queries it and it gets the response. It's pretty simple. But these are those cool tools that they give you. This Q&A maker is cool. Q&A maker is this thing here. I go in, I look at my knowledge bases. Again, you need a separate account. Don't know why. It hasn't really been brought into Azure yet, and Azure proper. So, oh God, I got 6 minutes. I think I'm fine. Yeah, this could replace his SharePoint list, as Bill suggested in the previous talk. He used a SharePoint list. Actually, that's not really true. I think he was using a SharePoint list to populate the Q&A maker. He didn't show that, but I think he was actually using it. He had a function that populated this. He also mentioned that you could populate off of an FAQ, right? So I've given it the FAQ from TechBash, and the TechBash FAQ already has a whole bunch of these questions, like when is TechBash, what is TechBash? I didn't have to program that again. I said, go check out my FAQ. Now, that's kind of cool. It seems really cool, but again, it's limited, right? It's a good starting place, but your bot needs to know more than the FAQ, right? So then what I did is I came up top here, and I added a couple of other things to the, like, are you real? Are you a bot? Who are you? I added these multiple questions that all go back to say, I'm not a real person. I'm a bot here to help as best I can. All right, it's a simple demo. I didn't get crazy with it. It works very similar to the Lewis stuff. I add values into here. I save and train them, and then I publish them, just like I would do at Lewis. And then it has that same kind of testing thing, and I can find out if it works. So once I do that, once I set this thing up, all I have to do is come over here and add this simple code. It's kind of boilerplate code. You'll copy this in, you'll Google this, or you'll Bing it. Sorry, Microsoft. You'll Bing it, and then you will get the code, and you'll put that in there. So that is how to use the Q&A maker. And you saw when I demonstrated that, right? It flowed through easily between different types of questions. And Lewis makes most of that possible. All right, just a couple things to wrap up. I think this is my wrap-up stuff. I mentioned that I'm using BotBuilder v4, which is in preview mode. Again, you can get my slides, and here's links to a whole bunch of stuff. It supports .NET, JavaScript, Python, and Java. I used a whole bunch of tools here. I used the Azure Bot Service, where I'm hosting my bot, and I can connect it to different things. I'm using BotBuilder v4, C# in my case. I used Lewis. I also used a thing called Lewis Gen, and I got a link for it here. I didn't demonstrate this, but remember my Lewis has those entities like speaker, and it has different intents. Well, with Lewis Gen, it's a command line you just type in, and it creates a strongly typed class that I just dump into my project. So it sort of understands the response from Lewis. It's a shortcut. You don't need to use it, but it's pretty cool. I used Q&A Maker. I used the BotBuilder SDK v4 template, and I used the Bot Framework emulator. I talked about adaptive cards really briefly. Here's a link to those if you get my slides. Didn't really talk much about deployment, but you might be wondering, well, what's my bot? Does anybody remember? What is my bot at its basic sense? It's a web app, right? It's a web app. How do you deploy a web app? Well, hopefully you either know that or you can read up, but it's a web app, right? I deploy it like I deploy any other web app, right into Azure in my case. And I didn't show the web chat control, didn't really have time. You saw a little bit about debugging. Works pretty well locally. You can actually debug up to Azure as well if you want. In other words, I was running my bot locally when I hit those breakpoints, but you can debug from Azure. And hey, that's pretty good. I got 3 minutes to spare. Any questions? And I was really rushing. I was really flying. But if you have any other questions, I'll take these now. Feel free to contact me. Thank you. Okay, so the question is, how long did this really take? I got to be honest, this took me a little while. This was not a one-night project. Some of it takes a while just to kind of figure out what you want to do. It's a different way of thinking. I'm used to building web apps. Is that my music? I'll dance a little bit. There's some music playing. So it took a little while. It was iterative. I made some mistakes. I went back and forth. I would say this probably, again, this is my first time using v4. So it's all new for me, just like it is for you. It's probably, I don't even know. I mean, it could be a week's worth of work to do this. Because, again, when you're learning, I'm reading, I'm researching, just like you guys would be doing. But what you get now, if you can figure out the way you want your bot to think, that's really hard, right? But the kind of logic you saw, asking questions and answers, querying, getting those values, that becomes boilerplate. You just kind of keep, once you got it, you just keep saying, okay, let's repeat that feedback dialogue I had multiple questions. All right, someone wants to register, multiple questions. I know how to do that now. Just, right? So hopefully that kind of helps. It's hard to quantify, but it's a little while. Any other quick questions? I know Bill's looking to stand up and kick me out of here. Question over here, sir. Is there a what emulator? A price estimator for Lewis. I haven't seen that specifically. Though I guess for Lewis, Lewis has some limits. I think there's there's tiers. I think, I'm not good at this stuff, but I think there's tiers of like free gets you like 1,000, something, and then higher level gets you more. I don't remember if it's like scalar. I think it's like A or B. I think. Check it out for yourself. And I think I'm cut off, so thanks for coming out. Appreciate your time. Oh, and Tech Bash. Did I mention Tech Bash? Did you mention Tech Bash?
You mentioned it 482 times. No, that was very entertaining, and I think get a good idea of what it takes to do this. Even you could make a bot this weekend. Schedule your time, and it'll be a lot of fun. So thanks for coming. Please clean up. And we did have, it looked like we had about 15 to 20 people online during the event, so that worked out pretty well. We're going to be here in 2 weeks. And what is the topic, sir, in 2 weeks?
It's an introduction to Git.
To the Git tools and doing source control of things.
It's just getting everybody set up from scratch with installing Git, getting it set up, and doing a repo, and understanding the commands and that kind of stuff. And then not the week after that, but the next month, we're going to do GitHub stuff. So
excellent. All right. So see you in 2 weeks for a lab, or 4 weeks for a monthly meeting. Thanks again for Philly Azure and Tim Farrow, and have a good night.